Hello and welcome back to Dimensional Shift. This week we're talking about insight, realization, and gnosis. We often speak about meditation and why it's so important to go within, and that the Buddha even said, "They who look outside dream, and they who look within awakens." But the question is, why is looking within so important, and why do we spend so much time in meditation? And it really comes down to what we're looking for in meditation, which is insight, realization, and gnosis. But again, what do we really mean by each of these things? Are they the same thing? Are they something different? Are they ancient philosophies that we've forgotten? So I went ahead and looked up the definition and etymology of each of these words, because sometimes we can learn a lot about what we're talking about just through the definition and especially through the etymology. So the definition term for gnosis is knowledge of spiritual mysteries. The etymology is Greek for to know. It just literally means to know. The interesting part about gnosis, though, is that it's not a knowing from anywhere external from ourselves. It's not knowledge that comes from the world. It's an inner knowing. The definition for insight is the power or act of seeing into or understanding a situation. The etymology is inner sight and inner wisdom. Realization is the act of becoming fully aware of something as a fact. Etymology goes straight back to the word real, or to make real. And the last one is so fundamental that it has to point to its own self, like the finger pointing to itself to explain. And that is understanding. The fundamentality of this word makes it ineffable, but I think that we've all had some sort of understanding in our lives that makes understanding make sense. The definition is the ability to understand something, comprehension. The etymology of understand, again, fundamentally of this makes it even harder to describe. The etymology of understand is understand. So a couple of really great examples of insight and realization and coming to these moments of knowing, of inner knowing, and making these connections between two things. The first one is Archimedes and his Eureka moment story. So Archimedes was, I suppose, some kind of mathematician in ancient Greece. I'm not sure exactly how the story goes, but the king was given this crown and he wanted to know if it was made of solid gold. And he gave it to Archimedes to figure out if it was made of pure gold. But Archimedes couldn't just melt down the crown to find that out, because then the crown would be ruined. And he pondered on this matter for a very long time. And he decided to take a bath to get his mind off things, and when he entered the bath, he realized that the amount of water pushed out of the bath was the same as his mass. And so in this way, he kind of discovered volume and how we measure volume mathematically. And when he found this out, the story goes that he ran shouting, "Eureka, Eureka," to the king, and he was naked because he was so excited he didn't even stop to put on clothes. That's the Archimedes story. But we also have a really great example of Helen Keller, who was both blind and deaf, and her teacher, who spent so many years helping her make the connection, just for the very, very first connection of water to a hand sign or a touch, or however exactly they did it. I think that they were using some kind of hand signs. But Helen Keller spent her whole life in darkness and in deafness. And so learning to communicate was something that was completely foreign to her. And most of her early childhood years were spent in turmoil and in tantrums, and they couldn't control her because she couldn't communicate. And so her teacher kept going over and over these symbols with her, touching things and giving her the symbols. And it wasn't until she dunked Helen Keller's hand into water and then gave her the symbol of water that finally it clicked. And Helen Keller had the realization that the sign meant water. And then, of course, they began to create all sorts of connections with other items and words and actions and all of these things. And so the important part of gnosis and realization and understanding is that we're making connections. We are taking one thing and connecting it to another. We're taking two dots and connecting them. But we have to be a little bit careful because the mind can make a lot of assumptions, and it has a lot of wishes that it wishes to fulfill, has a lot of desires, and it has a lot of protective mechanisms. And so we can't just take two arbitrary dots and say they're connected, because that doesn't make it truth. And there's a really great quote by Richard Bach, who's one of my favorite authors. He says, "A creative mind makes uncommon connections. So does a crazy mind. Creative mind makes uncommon, insightful connections." So we have to be careful of the associations and assumptions and connections that we're making. And this comes into the idea of synchronicities. A lot of people talk about seeing a lot of numbers, synchronicities. And in the beginning of my path, it was sort of interesting to see. And, you see 111 or you see 333 or whatever it is. And especially when we have so many clocks and we have dates all the time and all of these things, numbers are basically everywhere in this world. And eventually I began to realize that I was subconsciously looking at the clock at that time. Like my mind was calculating in the background of when 1 p.m. and 11 minutes was going to be, and I was looking at it, and it was kind of leading me down these stray paths, dead-end paths. And so I really had to back away from those kinds of number symbols, because in the end, they have no inherent meaning to me. And so a synchronicity is something that happens that goes way beyond coincidence, and it has a really meaningful impact on you. So we're looking past just patterns, and we're looking for patterns that have meaning. One of the ways that the number thing especially gets really kind of warped and manipulated is you see all of these metaphysical and spiritual businesses pricing their items at, $111 and $444 and all of these things. And it's kind of almost becomes like a forced or false synchronicity. And not that they're necessarily doing something bad, but, if you're tuned to, 333 means I have to follow that path, then you may be purchasing something that you don't necessarily need. So this is where intuition and discernment are really, really important. And they're going to become increasingly important as the energies and the reality kind of undergoes its transformation we're going through. It's the same as, when we have an entity or a spirit or something approach us and not just blindly trusting it. So just because you have a connection that's been made doesn't necessarily mean that it's a helpful connection or a true connection. So really feeling with your intuition and using discernment, does this have meaning to me? Does this feel right? Does it feel right in my body and my energy? Can I feel my heart chakra activate, or your chest center, whatever you want to call it, activate? Does it feel like it resonates at the right kind of frequency that's going to lead me where I need to go? So going back to our original question of what is an insight, what is a realization, what is an understanding, or what is gnosis? These most often come in periods of deep meditation or during the liminal state between waking and sleeping, during psychedelic use, and sometimes they can just happen out of the blue. And this just means that we've asked a question, we've taken something that we're wondering about, we've set an intention of, okay, I want to find the answer of this. We're taking it into meditation, and we're sitting with it, and we're opening ourselves up to receiving the answer. And this, when we open ourselves up, that's when we start getting these insights and we start having realizations, and we have these altered states of consciousness and higher states of consciousness. Not even with psychedelics. I mean, it can happen just through meditation. And we can start to understand fundamental truths about who we are, what this place is, truths about the universe and the way it works and all of these things. This is how all of these past masters and everything have brought this information into the world. They're not going and asking other people what their answers are. They're sitting down and they're connecting to their own higher consciousness and source consciousness and asking directly. Like, you don't need a middleman at all. Sometimes we can study with masters and learn different lessons through them, but you don't have to. You can go directly to the source and ask your question, bring your intention there. One really great way to do this is to ask a question and set an intention before you go to sleep. And, you will process that and work through it in your sleep, and you'll have access to so much more on the other side of the veil. And oftentimes you'll wake up with an answer or a clue or a feeling of what to do next. So if you really want to start understanding how insight and this direct experience of realization works, start with the questions like, who am I? Who is God or source creator or whatever word you prefer? What is this place? What is reality? What is this place made of? What is consciousness? All of these very fundamental questions that get down to the very base layer of everything. What is energy? What does that look like? What does that feel like? All of these things. And tune out all of the answers that you think you've received from someone else, that you've been researching, that you hope are true, that you don't want to be true. Like, let all of that go. This is a surrender of all of that and an opening up of your energy field and your mind to receive a direct experience. It's going to feel like an experience. And it may come in a flash. You may just, I get it, eureka, or it may come in kind of a journey form, or even like a conversation with, someone. Doesn't have to be named, but it feels like accurate information. I generally think of it as source creator. You definitely don't want a bunch of spirits and stuff trying to give you these answers unless you know exactly who you're working with and that it's a trustworthy source, like when I work with plant spirits and stuff. But I wouldn't go to a plant spirit and ask them about who is God. That's not quite the same type of energy. They're not going to be able to give the same kind of answers in the same way. But as much as possible, do a direct connection to source creator. To do this, you're really going to have to quiet your thinking mind down. You can do this by listening to your inner breath. You can hear your inner breath when your mind is quiet enough, and your mind will slow down and your energy field will calm down and your body will relax and your brain waves will enter a theta state. And this is also known as a trance state if you're thinking about shamanism and these types of things. And the question that you are asking, or your intention, is able to connect to those deeper layers in your unconscious and your subconscious. And if you can master staying in theta state and the various ups and downs in theta state, you'll be able to go deep enough to receive answers and bring them back through the veil without going so deep that you can't bring it back, because the veil kind of gets in the way and it gets lost. And sometimes it'll get garbled and things like this. But with practice, it will get easier. If you've not worked with the gateway process, I really recommend learning the gateway process. You can usually find it on YouTube. Wave 1 is the most important. Learn the process itself, and don't worry about all the later waves in which they're walking you through different things. Learn the process itself, and especially the phase 10, where you're counting backwards from 10, is really, really helpful if you're just learning how to enter theta state. But the point is to begin having a direct experience within consciousness itself and within your own mind. And it's not fantasizing, it's not daydreaming, you're not leading this necessarily. You're taking that intention within and having these things revealed to you. So you're having an inner exploration of consciousness and what lies within you. And some of the insights you may receive will truly blow your mind. All of these amazing, humbling, and sometimes bizarre, and sometimes so beautiful you start bawling, and sometimes they're so hilarious you just start laughing. Like, there's so many types of things that you can realize, but it's all a direct experience within you. Eventually, when you begin to hone your skill, you don't have to go quite as deep for these kind of direct revelations. And any idea that someone provides for you in different spiritual teachings or just in daily conversation, you can take into meditation. Don't take their word for it, but take it into meditation and meditate with it until you understand it, or until your discernment says that's not true or not meant for you at this time. The whole point of this is to come back to yourself and to restore your direct connection to Source, and to eliminate any need for outside validation, permission, for knowledge even. And once you really begin to work with your energy field and have these direct insights, you'll begin to use discernment more, and you'll be able to feel it instantly. So instead of saying, well, do I need this crystal or do I need this crystal? You'll just have an intuitive knowing of, okay, well, it's this crystal that's going to help more in this situation. So if you're coming to me with questions of this is right or can I do that, seeking permission or validation, I always do my best to point you back to yourself, because you have all the answers within you through gnosis, insight, and understanding. It's just a matter of learning to trust yourself and opening up and surrendering to that higher perspective, whatever you may wish to call that, and asking and setting your intention to receive and opening up to receive. And then that truly helps you come back to your true self and to be centered in your own knowing. And the waves of energy that come and the navigation starts to get a little bit easier. And yes, it's good to exchange ideas and have conversations and all of these things, but then when you are given a seed of an idea, you can discern if it's a seed that you want to plant within yourself and to grow, or if it's one that you're meant to discard.